So joining me today is Josh Bleggi, Learning Solutions Engineer, and he is here to talk to you about building in Lectora. Without further ado, Josh, I will let you take it over.
Thanks, Steph. Appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. I appreciate y'all taking the time to be here today. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And we'll kind of start talking about Lectora now. So let me go ahead and hide these controls here. So I know the what do we call it? The
The
description
webinar
of this
description.
webinar. Yeah. Talked about how we're going to show how Lectora can be used, how you can set up a workflow for rapid development. And I'm really excited to talk about this because this is something that we get a lot from people as they are kind of vetting Lectora, looking at Lectora as a tool. Is a lot of people are looking for speed and consistency in their content creation. And Lectora, to like new users as they're looking at it, can look a little bit daunting of a software. They don't really kind of see the forest amongst the trees kind of situation there. They don't really look at what it can do for them because there's a lot of things in Lectora built in that can really help speed up your content development. That's what we're going to talk about today, are some of those things. And as I was developing this webinar, if you hadn't heard yet, we actually had a release for Lectora Online over the weekend. For Lectora Online 6.1 is the version number. And there was some new things added to that as far as, an enhancement to our PowerPoint import function that really changes how useful that particular function is within Lectora Online. So we're going to take a look at that as well today. It kind of gives us a good chance to take a look at what's new in Lectora, and then kind of talk about how that fits into our workflow as developers and designers of e-learning. But first, I do want to start out with a couple of questions for everybody. The first being this kind of in the chat, and this is more like kind of more just customer research for us to kind of know from you guys. How long does it take you to build, on average, does it take you to build a course? Now, you take this question a couple of different ways, and like I said, just respond in the chat however you would. But you can either do like the total duration it takes you from like start to end, or you can kind of break down what maybe the time that takes you to storyboard as well as the time it takes you to develop. It's just kind of interesting to kind of see how long it takes people, kind of on average. So what I'd like to do with your responses afterwards is kind of figure out what that average is. And so we have some idea as far as, typically how long it takes. So if you want, I'm going to give you a few seconds to type in there. Just let us know how long it typically takes. You can put it in days, hours, however you want to factor that in there. But just going to be, I think, just some interesting information for us to kind of take a look at as a group. And as we're doing that, I'm going to actually pull up my chat here so that way I have it. Okay, so we have 1 month minimum. Oh, wow, okay.
All right, so 1 month is the time to beat. There are so many factors. That's true.
Well, okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Let's say the target course is, let's just say a 15-minute course. Let's just put it that way. Yeah, you are all right. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't factor in all the other variables that need to be put in there. Level of complexity. I know people define that different ways, but we'll just, because we at least in our custom vision, we have level 1, level 2, level 3. So we'll just say kind of level 2 complexity, which is going to be a little less presentational, a little bit more complex on the interactions and things. Okay, so 2 weeks. So 1 month, 2 weeks. And let's see if we get any more answers here in the chat.
So definitely a fairly significant amount of time
Yeah,
each way.
for sure. Yeah. And I think that's what we typically find, like 3 to 4 weeks. Okay. With scenarios and activities, no media needed. Oh, that's a good point too. Yeah, your media production would add time to that as well. If you needed to capture video or record voiceovers or things like that. Um, is it after you're designing it, so you're just developing? Yeah, we'll say just developing. You can maybe factor in some of the storyboarding time into that, where you're planning it in there and designing it. So I guess that being said, I kind of just took back my answer after I said it. Sorry. Sorry, I should have, been a little more clear on this one. Yeah, just include total time it takes to build the course, from conception to the end. Testing, review, and release all take time as well. We also have to deal with multiple languages. So yeah, there's a lot of variables that play into this. That's these are all very valid, good points that you're bringing up here. Because yeah, it's not just the development cycle, but it is that release and review and testing in there. So there's a lot of, so it looks like a pretty significant amount of time is what we'll kind of say, just because there's so many things that factor into this. So we'll kind of move on to our second one, which is actually going to be polling. You can go ahead and still answer that first question here in the chat. But going into the second question here, how many courses are you typically working on are you currently typically work on it, Simon? Like, how you want to answer this in that regard? We're just kind of curious to see, what your workloads look like typically.
All right, so that poll is on the screen. We'll give it another minute for everybody to put their answers in and let us know. So far, it's looking like about half of the audience is usually working on 3 to 5 at one
3 to
time.
5. Okay.
All right, I am going to share those results so everyone can see them there. It changed a little bit after I said that. People were like, oh, no, I got to get my opinion in there.
Yeah, so it still looks like, yeah, most of you are working on, between 3 and 5. There is the next one is just one course. But some of you are working on 5 to 10 or more than 10 courses. And that's, incredible that's kind of your workload there. But I think that kind of goes to show that you're not always just working on one thing all the time. And just kind of going back to kind of my background, and why I'm talking about this, because I think we all have seen this before, these kind of concerns that we have here, but just kind of going back to my background. So when I was hired on at ELB, I was hired on as a learning designer to help with our off-the-shelf content, our off-the-shelf courses that we built a few years back. And I will confess, I was brand new to instructional design at that point in time, but I had a lot of training in UX design, graphic design, and some other areas that were very much related to the learning design area. And I had worked at a learning tech company prior to coming to ELB, but in a kind of different role. And so I understood, a little bit of what was going on. But what really helped me as we were trying to develop, usually we would, me and the other designer would work kind of hand in hand on one course for a very long time. And so typically, like you were all saying, it typically take us a couple of weeks to get through a storyboard or whatnot to produce a longer course. And at that point, those courses we were building were about 60 minutes or so in seat time, and relatively, kind of low complexity. It wasn't all presentational, but there's definitely not a lot of media or anything in those particular ones. But then we were given the task at, eventually once we got about 20 courses into that, we were then told, okay, let's turn them into microlearning. And so we had to go back through those 20 courses and break them up into microlearning chunks, which then took additional time and really took us, it takes a significant amount of time to build these courses. So, anywhere from, took us anywhere from about a week or so to a month to build out those courses, depending on the complexity of them. And typically we were working on multiple at the same time, like you're seeing here. What really helped us in those situations is we had developed as a team a very good workflow, and we were also fortunate that we had a pretty significant team to where we had people designing the storyboards. Then we had others that were developing. We had others that were helping with the graphic assets and things like that. So we're able to kind of part those things out to different people to kind of help create this. And so we were able to kind of build those at a very rapid speed. Still not quite to where we wanted our deadlines to be, but we were able to keep things going. And one of the things that really helped us was something that we refer to as a storyboard design system. And we'll talk a little more about design systems here in a second. But it was really a very simple way to kind of keep our workflow going. And so that's really what I think is more important than whether, I think a lot of people focus on, okay, the tool needs to be, a lot of people focus on, okay, the tool needs to do everything for me. It needs to be simple to use and things like that. Where that, is true, like it needs to be able to do things efficiently and effectively for you. There's a lot of things us as designers and developers need to do to make sure that the tool works best for us and that we work best with the tool. It's not necessarily all about what the tool can do. It's about us using it in the most effective manner and knowing the different features and things that we can tap into to make sure that our workflow is streamlined. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to walk you through two different workflows. These are not necessarily the only workflows that you can use. They're definitely, going to be good in different use cases, depending on how your company works, how you work with your clients, whatever that might be. And maybe not both of these workflows, maybe there's components of each that work better for you. So I'm not going to state that these are like the only two things that you can do. These are the two that I think for me work the best. And that I've used a couple of different times in my career here, building out these different courses and things that I think are very effective. Now, that being said, like I said, these are not the end all exhaustive list here. Feel free in the chat, because I really like this to be a collaborative. Lectora has a really great community. That's one of the things that I've always really loved about it, as I've been introduced to it over the last few years. And so I would invite you to share other time-saving tips you see in here. If you see something that maybe I'm doing, a different way than you would do it, go ahead and put that in the chat as well. If there's things I'm not pointing out that you would recommend, go ahead and put those in there as well. I'm not saying that I'm going to show you everything that you need to know here today. I'm just going to kind of share kind of a high level overview of each of these, so that way you get an idea. So we'll be inside these slides. We'll also be inside Lectora, specifically Lectora Online. However, pretty much everything that we're going to show today will work in Lectora Desktop. There's only a few differences that I'll point out to where your workflow might be slightly different depending on which one you're using. So don't get too hung up on the tool that I'm choosing to use if you use the opposite. So if you use desktop, these things will still work for you in slightly different ways, but they're going to be pretty much the same as we go through these. So that being said, we'll walk through our first workflow here, which is going to be what I'm calling a Lectora course design system. Now, first off, what is a design system? So this is a term borrowed from UX design. And so this is the best definition I found for it. And I've used this at a couple of different webinars throughout the years as well. It's from designbetter.co. And what they kind of state and define a design system as, it's a collection of reusable components that are guided by clear standards that can be assembled together to build any number of applications. So there's two key components to this that I've bolded here on this slide, and it's reusable components and then with clear standards. So in a lot of ways, clear standards kind of means like branding, usage guides, things like that. How do you, what's the appropriate usage of this particular item within the course, which is a very important piece, because if you just had these reusable components and there was no guiding standards behind it, you could end up with a little bit of a mess. And the nice thing with Lectora is these reusable components can be built and saved directly into Lectora. And if you're using Lectora Online, you can save them directly with your team as what are called library objects. So essentially what library objects are is a way to create a component library within your Lectora Online or Lectora Desktop application. So that way you can reuse elements that you built in the past. This can be a very big time saver for everyone, because if you built a very complex interaction, you can save that and use it again. If you've used, the same font tag every single time, you can save that, pull it in again. It's very nice, and something that I use, daily when I'm building in Lectora, because it just saves me so much time. So just kind of diagram what this workflow looks like. And to those of you that, mentioned testing and review, I did factor that into this whole entire process here. So as far as I see, there's kind of 4 main stages, not necessarily steps, but stages that we go through within this workflow. And that's number 1, starting from a template. And that means a template that you've built to meet your needs and your standards for your company. Then you go in and build the course. So that can be taking that template and then adding additional pages to it that are either just kind of static layouts or interactions, scenarios, media, whatever that might look like for you. But utilizing media or the library objects as often as you can within there. That's a very key thing, to just be able to reuse over and over again. And then there's obviously going to be a review cycle. And you'll notice that I put, these lines kind of going back and forth between these, because that can, take some iteration. That can be, an alpha beta review that could take multiple kind of agile kind of approaches to it. But we have a review tool built into Lectora that comes with Lectora and Review Link that really makes that process quite simple. We're not going to dive too much into that today, but just know that that's there for you to go through SME review, go through other developers reviewing it. It's a very useful tool for that. And then finally, you have the publish or release side of it. I probably should have put release there instead of publish, but that's kind of the idea that we're going through, is these 4 different phases in this. So probably should have moved those slides a little bit differently. That one should have been up there. But we already kind of talked about how the design system helps. But these are kind of more the steps that go into creating this design system. So just kind of note that this does take time kind of up front, and even as you're going through the process of developing courses. But over time, it starts to help you, with a better, more rapid development life cycle. So versus having to do all these things all the time, you're able to kind of replicate everything and just, do everything once and then try it over and over, and then you just use it over and over again. But for me, like the kind of 3 things that I kind of put in here is, number 1, building your baseline template, which I'll show you an example of that here in a second. This will include things like your fonts. So if you're using custom corporate fonts, those can be included in there along with your font styles. Now, font styles, I do put an asterisk there. They are saved directly to Lectora, so you can use them in other courses just automatically within there. And you do have, as far as I can come across, an unlimited way to add as many styles as you want to there. Then you also set up your color palette. You can create custom color palettes in Lectora. You can save those and export them so that others can use them, or you can save them as kind of a backup in case you happen to overwrite them at some point. You can just kind of import them back in. Again, these are saved directly to Lectora. They aren't necessarily contained within the file itself, at least as far as I've had experience with them. And they can be, again, exported and shared with your team. This will also include your branding and look and feel. So that can be like your header, navigations, if there's a certain menu system that you use, those types of things. And then we'll have your essential course structure. So if all your courses are going to include a title slide, as well as objectives, as well as a kind of a conclusion slide that all look the same, or if you're going to use the same type of test every single time, you can include all those things in there, and also save your project settings, where that might be, okay, we're going to make sure that this is able to be published to the SCORM. We're going to make sure that accessibility is turned on. We're going to make sure that this is going to be a mobile responsive project, all of those things. You can set those in this baseline template, so that way you don't have to go in and touch those again. You can just leave them, as your standards have kind of set those out there. And then our step 2 here, kind of phase 2 here, is build out and save those library objects. And so that's building out, interactions, scenarios, page layouts, the theme itself, buttons, anything else, etc., that you're going to need. Building those in kind of advanced and saving those as library objects really saves you time as you're building courses. You can utilize ELB templates to build those. So that's why we give you that template library there with the tool, and so that you have something you can pull from, so you're not always building from scratch. Because I think as the designers and as developers, we want to avoid building from scratch as often as we possibly can. We want to be able to just kind of reuse something and kind of go through that over and over again. And then we're also going to want to set up some clear guidelines for usage. So this could take the form of like a design document, some sort of brand guide, those types of things to use here. So these are kind of the 3 components that you need to set up for this to work. So let me kind of show you some of these things here in Lectora Online. So like I said, we're using Lectora Online today. Similar things can work in desktop. So if you're using desktop, don't worry, these things will still work for you. I'm going to hit create new project here. And you'll notice we have different options for creating that project. So we have our kind of typical templates that we have that ELB has created and provided for everyone. We also do have the AI course wizard. If you haven't experimented with this, this is quite an interesting tool. We actually have a little video on it that, I don't know, Steph, maybe you can post that in the chat or something if you're curious to learn more about it. But the templates that I want to focus on today are these that are going to be in your templates section. Now, these are probably should be titled more my templates. So that way, these are, the templates that you've created. And so these can be baselines for different courses, different styles of courses, whatever you want here. So I have 3 different ones saved here. What I'm going to go ahead and use is this Conforta here. And I'm going to go ahead and just, create it here. I'm going to put it into my shared project folder here, just so that way I have it. And I'm going to just change the date on it. So that way it's a different title than it was before. I'm just change it to today's date. And going to go ahead and click OK there. Go ahead and pull up the chat here. Okay, let me go ahead and have the meeting controls again here. So here we have my baseline template here. So like this includes, like I said, a very basic layout of a course. Now this is one of our course starters that I just rebranded for ease of use for my purposes today. But you'll notice it has kind of your typical different layouts here within this course. So that way, it's a good baseline for any course that I'm going to build here. It includes a test here, so I know it's ready to be published. Has that graded test component, so it's able to be published to SCORM. You have the assignable unit up here at the top. You have the different theme elements here, and you have the font tag here. Now the fonts is something that's kind of interesting, and a lot of people, I think, if you've done development, you kind of know that you need to make sure your fonts are embedded into your project. And in this case, I am using 2 custom fonts. I'm not using fonts that are built directly into Lectora Online automatically. So I'm using one called Conforta, which is going to be my title font here. And then my other one is Open Sans. And so for me, I was able to set this up as additional fonts tag here. And there's a full knowledge base article on exactly how to do this. And so I just kind of pre-configured these in here. And this, especially if you're not familiar with how to code or things like that, can look pretty daunting. It's actually pretty easy because you just kind of copy and paste the snippet in there and just change out your fonts that you have in there. And I use Google Font, which kind of helps with that. If you're using like an OTF or a TTF file because your company's font isn't one that's available out there online, I get that, but you can attach those as additional files to this tag as well and still have those accessible for you. So just know that you do have both routes that you can go with it. But now that I have that tag in place, and I've actually, you do have to refresh your file, save and refresh your file in order for this to happen. But I now can access those 2 fonts directly here within this dropdown. So there's already getting my fonts in there. Now these are tied to the file itself. So just kind of keep that in mind, but they're already here because they're part of this template that I was using. Now, another thing here is also your text styles here. So you notice I have a variety of different text styles that I've created here. These are saved directly to Lectora. So as you're going from file to file, these will still be here. But I've set this up in a couple of different ways for me. So I've put in a title font, but I've also put in a light title. So if I ever need to do a dark background and I need a light title, I have that there. Same thing with the body of the body font as well. I have a body, dark and light, and the subtitle. I probably should create a subtitle one that is also a light version, but right now I just have the dark. And the way these are created is simply just hitting Manage Styles and hitting Create New, and then a new pop-up box will come in here, and you'll be able to name your new font, and name your new style, select what font you're looking for, its size, whether you want it bold, italic, or underlined. And I'll show you a little preview down here as well, just so that you know. But then you can pick a color here. So you can go into your custom colors and pick those as well here. So that way everything stays branded for you. And once these are created once, you can click on one here and hit export. And then they can be imported into another user's instance. So if you have a team of, say, 5 designers, you can share this with your entire team. They'll need to import it in here, but that way you're all using the same font styles all the time. Granted, you could also have them just go in and set up the same parameters, but that takes more time than just importing and exporting these would take there. The other thing that I think is important to point out is just kind of creating the color palettes as well, which is something I don't know that many people take advantage of per se, at least the import and export functionality of that. So if you notice here, I have some custom fonts or color swatches down here that are part of this color scheme for this particular file. So you can think of these as your brand color scheme, because that typically doesn't change. You typically have usually, couple primary colors and then some accents. You can just save those here, so that way you have them always accessible to you. And simply to create these, I simply just come into custom, type in my hex code. I find that to be the easiest approach here. You can do RGB as well, but I find the hex to be the easiest option here. And then you simply just say, right click here on one of these squares, and we'll add that current selected color to that line there. And then you can also export this. It comes out as a JSON file that can then be imported into another instance of Lectora. So that way you do save those things. Again, this way someone can do this once and send it to everybody else on the team, and they can import it here. But these are all things that I would set up with just this baseline template, along with this layout of this course. But now, okay, so I have my basic layout of my course, but I need to go in and actually start building this thing. And so after this 50% layout here, maybe I want to add in an interaction. So I can come over here to my library objects, and I have a couple of different options here. But you'll notice here in my library objects, I do have different folders set up, so that way I can organize everything together. So I not only have my Conforta project here, but I also have all the interactions that are going to go with it. I have different page layouts, and I also have different things to go with the test. But I also created some different elements here that were just this blank background, which, if you can notice, this like white overlay over this image, along with this triangle and parallelogram, I think is what that shape's called, together as a background that can be applied to any slide. I put that in here, as well as the additional fonts tag as a separate element, as well as the navigation and the theme as a whole thing, just in case I ever needed to reuse those elements in a different project in a different way. I threw those in here, but we'll go ahead and pull in one of our interactions. So if you haven't seen how library objects work, I'll just kind of pull in this, go with this click to reveal here. So basically how library objects works is you build something in Lectora, whether that be an interaction, a page, multiple pages, or just, a little bit of text or something that you want to use over again. So maybe it's like a copyright statement you want to save. And you simply just come over to whatever object you have selected and say, I want to save it as a library object. And then it's going to pull up and say, okay, give it a title. And then you save it, and it's saved there. You can also download them too. Again, if you wanted to share these with somebody else outside of your team, if you're in Lectora Online, everything will all these library objects will automatically be shared with everyone that's attached to your organization. In Lectora Desktop, because it is a desktop application, there's no real internet connection that's using to connect everybody. You can download the library objects and send them to everybody else, or save them on like a Dropbox or Google Drive, whatever you might have. And then everybody can have access to them there and import them into their own instance. So it's a little bit more cumbersome in desktop than it is in online, but again, it still works the same way here. But once I've created and saved this, I can then drop it into any course. So which is what I've done here already. And you'll notice that it kept the title here. This is actually going to keep the title of whatever it was titled in the original Project Explorer where it was created, not necessarily the object title, although in this case, it was the same. But now I have a full 4-tab click to reveal built in just a few seconds. And all I need to do now is go in and type in my content, adjust the layout if the content size needs to change a little bit, and I'm good to go. And the nice thing with these two is it's already mobile responsive for me. That's already been done. All that work's been done in advance. So you can kind of see the value of building these things in advance and just dropping them in as you go, because it's going to just speed you up so much faster. And that way you can build these complex things relatively easily. Now, there's always going to be exceptions to this. There's always going to be things that you might need to build yourself, but those should come up less and less as you grow this library. So like my suggestion to everyone is just as you're building something that is relatively complex that you know you're going to use over and over again, potentially. I mean, if you don't know for sure that you're going to use it again, if you think there's even remotely a chance, just save that out as a library object and just build out that library as big as you possibly can. So that way it's easy to kind of come across, and make sure your naming conventions are good too. That helps, and those folders help to set that up as well. And that way you can kind of keep those organized and everybody can have access to the same things and kind of pull the same way. So again, it's keeping consistency across the entire team, plus getting that speed for you there as well. And so it's quite powerful. And then, like I said, the kind of the next phase of this whole thing is then just taking this into Review Link and then publishing it out there. One other thing that I will mention here as well, because this gets asked quite often, as most of you probably know, you do have an asset library that comes with Lectora from ELB that is going to give you millions of stock images and stock video, stock audio clips there, as well as cutout characters, icons, and Lectora templates all come with that. But there's going to be times when your marketing team is going to want to prove a certain set of pictures that you have to use for all your courses, right? Like that's a common problem we run into. Or I shouldn't say problem, a common situation we run into. Marketing is never a problem. Even most, I'm going to dig a hole here. I'm going to stop. But
wow, Josh, see if I let you do another webinar.
This may be my last show, guys, just FYI. But there's going to be times when you're going to want to make sure that certain images and things are available to your team. And so we do have a media library built in directly to Lectora here. And these do, again, as you notice here, it gets shared as in shared media here. So anytime you see shared here in Lectora Online, that does mean shared with your entire team. So, just note that there. Again, in desktop, I believe this functionality is also there, but again, it's just for you. You'd have to share the same folder with your entire team for them to have access to it. But one of the things that I like that we can do here in Lectora that makes this process really easy, rather than uploading individual images, you can upload an entire zip file. So you can zip those all into a single folder, upload them to Lectora, and it's going to come in and pull in these graphic source files. So that's what happened here. Is I put this in as a zip file. I upload this. Actually, our templates do this for us already. There's already a zip file for all the graphics that come with it. So this was a lot easier than even I'm making it sound here for me. But now I have all the different images that I could possibly use that have been approved to go with this style to use, as often as I need to. So this way, if you're going to use the same image a lot or you're using your logo a lot, you can go ahead and throw that in here for everybody. So that way they have access to it. And so like there's that going on there. And then, like I said, always keep a kind of a consistent guideline out there for you, for your team. So Steph, looks like there's some questions. So we'll go ahead and kind of pause here for a second, because that's kind of the end of this particular workflow.
All right, perfect. So I think we've got a question in the chat and a similar one in the Q&A. So if you have set up the templates and your library objects correctly, if you need to update the overall look of the courses, how easily can you do that without redoing each individual course? Like if you've got 100 courses that all use the company logo and background image, and you need to change that, how do you do that? If you have it set up as a template.
Yeah, so if you have it set up as a template, and if anybody from the development team is here and can kind of help with this one, because there's not really a way to kind of do a global update to all your courses in the way that I think people are expecting here, to where if they update something on a template, it's going to automatically update on all the courses that are published with it. That's just not something that we're doing here. This isn't like a true like content management system in that sense, where it's just going to update those assets wherever they're linked. Unfortunately, you would have to go into each course and kind of update them there. And so like you're saying, like using the logo 100 times, yeah, you would have to go in there and make sure that it's updated in each of those courses and go through. So that can be a lengthy process on updates. That is kind of a challenge at this point. Something that we can look into in the future to kind of make that process a little bit easier, because that is a concern I get quite often is, okay, I need to make an update. How easy is that? And that's where kind of my little hesitations here kind of come into play. Is like, it's pretty easy to go in there and drop in a new template and get your content in there, but it doesn't necessarily automatically update for you, even if you have everything set up correctly there. So it doesn't kind of keep track of where those library objects are. Everything's still kind of object based. And so you are updating individual instances of those objects, not a global element in a sense, hopefully that makes sense to everyone. But
yeah, and I've reached out to the dev team to see if they have any suggestions on quick ways to do that. While we wait for them to respond, can the images in the shared media be tagged for quick searching?
You can update I believe you can update the metadata on them. So you come into properties, you can add a description, you can add keywords here, you can update the metadata here, so they can be searched by keyword as well here. So yes, you can do those types of things there.
Okay, perfect. I think those are all the questions, and I will let her know if we get some advice from Dev on the other question.
Thank you, Steph. So I'll go ahead and leave this file. We'll go back into our PowerPoint here really quick. So our workflow number 2 here is PowerPoint to Lectora. Now, some of you are like, well, I love Lectora. PowerPoint is, kind of a very simple tool to use. Why would I use that when I can use Lectora to create my training? Well, that might be very good for you, but there's probably a lot of people on your team within your company that you can kind of sort of pawn work off to make this a little bit easier on you as well. So why do you use PowerPoint as kind of the start of your project to maybe storyboard and import that into Lectora to kind of save you that time? Typically everyone has access to PowerPoint. I don't know of many organizations that don't subscribe to it or don't have access to it in one way or another. And this really gives you a chance to get your SMEs and other people involved. Put less trained employees, because I didn't really know what the exact term I wanted to use there was, but just people that have maybe not been trained up on Lectora to use it, that gets them the ability to start that course. It's easy to keep it consistent because, again, that PowerPoint template can be pretty easily updated and shared with everyone. Typically, your marketing team may take on the role of making sure that it's branded correctly and making sure that's everything's updated consistently. And it's really fast to convert it to e-learning. It's very shockingly fast how much you can do in a very short time. And then it allows you to focus on, as I kind of put here, is the fancy stuff, the more advanced stuff that you want to add to these courses, like scenarios, animations, things like that. And this workflow looks pretty similar to that first one that we saw here. So you're going to import your PowerPoint file. So starting from a template, you're going to convert it to e-learning. So adding in, e-learning like elements to it. You're then going to enhance it with probably something similar like library objects in there as well. Again, there's going to be that review cycle as well for you. And then you're going to deliver that. So you're going to publish that out and release it. Now, how do we set this up? It's going to be very similar to that last one. You're going to set up a baseline template, but this time, rather than doing it in Lectora, you're doing it in PowerPoint. So that way everyone has access to that. And then my thought process on this, although I did not have time to fully do this part, is kind of building out what I'm calling a PowerPoint import shell. And this is essentially something that has all the e-learning elements built into it. So it has the assignable unit and tests. That way it will publish to SCORM. You have your basic navigation in there. You'll have the fonts embedded in there because those don't import with the PowerPoint file on its own. It's just not something that is supported there. You can add your theme in there, so maybe you want to leave off any sort of navigation or theme on there. That's kind of optional. And then you're also going to build out and save library objects, and you're going to set up, again, clear guidelines for this. So very similar process, but it differs, just on kind of the first couple of steps here. But let me kind of show this to you because, again, this is a brand new way of doing this in Lectora Online. I know the question is going to come up, is this feature going to be updated in desktop as well? Right now, as far as I've been told from the development team, they do have plans to put it into Lectora desktop at a later date, but there's not a date set. So please don't come asking our support team when it's going to be out. We don't know quite yet when that's going to be, but there is plans to update it there as well. Although right now, the reason we updated it online first and not in desktop is because desktop, because I was actually one of the people that kind of told them, hey, we need to update this because a lot of customers were asking for it. And a lot of newer organizations that I was talking to were using online. So that was part of the reason why I was here first. The other reason is that in desktop, the way that we import the PowerPoint and bring in the kind of size that the PowerPoint is going to be, it worked quite well in there to get the widescreen proportions in there, just the size to Lectora feature option in there, versus in online, for some reason, we're still looking at 4:3 aspect ratios, which aren't typical of PowerPoint anymore. And there wasn't really a way to break out of that. And so one of the things I told them that we needed to make sure that this feature did was make sure that everything imports at the correct size that people would expect for PowerPoint. So now that I've said all of that stuff, let me go ahead and kind of show you how this works. So we're going to hit import PowerPoint. Now this can also be done from the ribbon inside of a Lectora project. I'll show you where that is here in a second. Oh, hit browse, and I'm going to come to just my desktop here real quick, and I'm going to find a PowerPoint. So this is going to be a similar style to what we just saw in that other one. It's going to be, I basically recreated that style in PowerPoint, at least a few of the slides in there. And then I'm going to hit import. Now you notice here that we now have another pop-up that's going to ask us for kind of some parameters for this import. So we have our project size, which you can kind of pick 3 different options for this, depending on which one you prefer. So I kind of recommend experimenting with it yourselves. You can either size it to the width of 1009, which, if you're familiar with Lectora, that is our standard width for our PowerPoint, for our pages, sorry, in our Lectora Online. And then it's basically going to keep the same aspect ratio and just, adjust the height to make that the exact aspect ratio, whether that happens to be a 4:3 or whether that be a 6 or a 16:9. And then there's going to be the actual PowerPoint presentation size. And then there's the option, just what size do you want it to be? So you can set a custom size here. You make sure that it maintains the aspect ratio you're looking for. Because if you're familiar with PowerPoint, and I was talking with the developers about this yesterday, because I was noticing something, to me, when we do the actual PowerPoint size, and I'll show you an example of this so you kind of see what I'm saying, is brought it in at kind of a smaller size that I wasn't really expecting, but that's just what the API kind of dictates as the size that PowerPoint normally is. Because if you actually go into PowerPoint and try to set your custom size, you don't really have a pixel way of doing that. You can do it by inches, but traditionally, basically what you have is a 4:3 or a 16:9 aspect ratio slide, and that's just because those are the different screen sizes that we've had throughout history. Since computers were a thing. Traditionally, like when older computers were 4:3 on their size, so they're a bit more square. But now our monitors are typically going to be 16:9 in most cases. Some of us may have slightly different, like I'm on an ultra wide, which is why my screen is like this. So I have a 21:9 aspect ratio monitor. So it's a little bit different there. But basically that means that there's not really a pixel size set for that. There's an aspect ratio. And so we can really come in here, and as long as we're maintaining that aspect ratio, which for me, I personally like my slides a little bit bigger anyways. And so I put in my width and height here. So I'm using 1280 by 720, which is essentially 720p, if you're ever familiar with those terms there. And then you can also set, an option to import tables as images. We actually now by default import those as editable objects. That's a new change to this. That's one of the big updates to this. So now you can actually update table data in there. I don't think it translates into the graphs, if I remember right. Like those still come in as images, so you would need to trade those out for an appropriate graph if you needed. But you do have the tables as fully editable things in there. And then you have the option to use translations or transitions. Sorry, here. I typically tell people leave the transitions out of your PowerPoint slide, because PowerPoint, one of the things that they do very, very well is gives you all sorts of options for different animations and transitions. Right now, Lectora does not support all of those animations. So I just recommend just doing none and just going in and doing all your transitions within Lectora, so that way you know that they're all supported. That way you don't have to have weird things mapping and things like that, because you can only import supported transitions or just remap to supported transitions as well. But again, you may need to go back in and adjust stuff a bit more there. So it's just easier just to leave them out and just go in and do them yourselves. Then if you drop down this advanced, you get a few more options here. Like you can pick what image format it's going to do. You're also going to pick whether you're going to allow Lectora inheritance of some common elements. I have this one turned off, but we have this add PowerPoint style page advance. Essentially what this will do is give you actions within the project level of Lectora to essentially advance the slide based off of an enter or spacebar click, which is how we advance a PowerPoint slide. So it's quite useful if that's the navigation you want to use, and that'll work as an e-learning module. I would just recommend, if you're going to leave that on, that you put some instructions somewhere telling the user that that's what they're going to do. Otherwise, they're going to think that they're just stuck on a slide. And then we have different things for importing shapes as images versus as shapes. And then there's just some things where, again, some of the shapes from PowerPoint may not match to what's in Lectora. So we're going to remap those. I'll try to find the correct ones. Otherwise, they think they come in as an image, if I remember correctly there. But now that I have everything set here, I'm just going to go ahead and hit OK here. And it's going to import. It's just going to take a couple of seconds here. This isn't very long. This, I think, is like 5 or 6 slides. It's not very, very big. Was there any questions, Steph, while we're waiting?
No new questions. We did get a response about easily updating those logos and images on multiple courses. If you use, so the project team says, use a Lectora web object with a link to the image on your website or server, and then you could change that image on your server as long as you keep the name the same. So you just keep like uploading a new image with the same name, and that new image would be loaded in your course. If the image size changes, it probably would also change size in your Lectora project. So you would want to be using an image with the same dimensions.
Yeah, you would.
But hopefully that helps.
So with that little note here, we now have our PowerPoint in here now. And so we look at this, like I said, this is pretty similar to what we created in Lectora, but just in PowerPoint this time. And so you see some of these different layouts here. So now what I would go in here, and I'm not, for sake of time, I'm not going to go in and do all this for you right now. But I would go in and now add some navigation here at the top. So if I come in here, actually I will do it because I have them as library objects. Makes it a lot easier. I'll come in and throw. Now these were built to be part of a Lectora file, but their settings, if you see in the properties here for the navigation, I think these ones were set to be offset. Well, apparently, maybe they were not. Maybe it's not position size. There you go. They're offset from the bottom and right, which makes it a little bit useful because when you drop them into something, they're just going to offset there for us. But now they're going to be inherited on each page. So now I have basically, if I add an AU and a couple of variables to this, I could have a fully fledged course right now. But again, it's all going to be static slides, which as designers and developers, I know we don't really like. So now I can go in and add interactivity to this. Now for something like what I'm looking at here, where I have essentially what looks like an interaction, right? What I'm going to do here is convert this to, basically I'm going to make this an interaction now versus a static slide. So I'm going to go ahead and convert this shape to a button, kind of do that same thing on each one of these here. And I'm going to go ahead now and select this text box here. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and copy and paste this 5 times now. Now I'm going to just change this into rename this real quick to step 1. Step 2, and so forth there. Again, I'm not going to go through and due to time, I'm actually not going to go ahead and finish this, but get the idea is I'm now building this out as an interaction. So that way, anytime this is now going to be a click to reveal. So now I can come up here to my first oval 5 here. So that's one thing to point out here as well. You're probably like, why is it saying oval 5? It's actually pulling in the item name from the object name from PowerPoint. You can go in and change that. So if you go into the selection pane, you're able to change those names there. So you can import all those as the correct thing. Otherwise, might have a little bit of mess like we're seeing here. But I am going to here and just going to configure this action to say, okay, on click, show, and then we're going to say, luckily it already got it for me as step 1, but you kind of see now it's created a little bit of an interaction for me there, except for I think I forgot to set this as initially hidden in order for that to be out there. So why is it? Oh, because this one's still set as, all these are still set as visible. So go in here and just going to initially hide all of them. Don't know what I'm doing wrong here, but you get the idea. Live television, folks, it happens. There's something I'm missing there, but you get the idea there. You can go in and create these as an interaction pretty swiftly. So then you now have all your content in there. You now just need to go and kind of just dress it up a bit and make it what you need it to be for as far as your e-learning goes. And so another fast way to kind of get your content through, again, using a tool that people have access to, people generally know how to use, and then basically what this does is for you as developers, it frees you up to do kind of the more intricate things that you want to do there. So, so that's kind of the 2 options that I thought for you today. Hopefully those are helpful. Hopefully those gives you something to think about, and kind of maybe applying some of those to help speed up your process as you're building courses there. If there's other things that you can think of that you'd like to share with the chat, feel free to do so. If there's other things that you have questions about, feel free to ask those now. We have a few minutes left here to ask some questions. Also, if you wanted to reach out to me or connect with me after the call, feel free to do so as well. I didn't actually put that information up here, which I should have, but you feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. You'll pretty obviously see this face and you'll be there, so you'll be able to do that. So how can I add the forward and back buttons is a question here. So there's a couple pretty easy ways to do that. So I added these. So I just created these as a library object. But to create these initially, you just come here to insert and say, I want to insert a button. And you can kind of use your own, make your own buttons there with the text or images, but you can also use a stock button here. If you just come here to navigation, there's different options for your next and back options here. So you do have like a next and back that are just the triangle. Then you also have ones that are in circles, things like that. And you can drop these guys in. And the nice thing here is if you shift and click those, you can put those in there together. And you have the option of, how do you want to align them as multi-line buttons there, multi-buttons there. And you can, space them as you wish. It defaults to 20, but you can change that. You can also change the kind of the foreground color here to a couple of different options. So you have like, gray, a lighter gray, and a white. And then you can put them on, a different background color here, or, just keep them transparent if you like. So you can kind of, adjust those as you wish there. Then you just simply insert them. And so they insert here and they automatically will come with an action. And in this case, these actually come with the action, I think, pre-built in here to go in with to the next page and back and previous page. So they already have the next and back navigation in there as well. So that's another option of how you would create these. They ended up in my group and I didn't quite mean them to, but sorry. So if there's a game, you can track the progress of that student with ScrumX API. Yes, you can. Key differences between online and desktop. So the key one for me is Lectora Online has collaboration features in it. And that to me is probably the biggest differentiator there, where you can collaborate on the same file at the same time with other authors. But you do have to check out, different pages or different objects for you to edit yourself. So that way you don't have weird versioning things happening by other people going and editing the same thing at the same time. But that's honestly the biggest one there. There's some smaller things as far as, UI differences and things like that, that are just kind of just different things are styled a little bit differently. There's a couple of features that are in desktop that aren't in online and vice versa. So like within desktop, there is the page events pane or the timeline. That's not in online currently. Then there's also some differences to the button states as well. So in desktop, you do get I think like 3 more different button states that you can set, versus Lectora Online doesn't have those currently. They're looking into putting that in there though, as far as what I've been told. So we are trying to bring them in as much parity as we possibly can. So there's really not a lot of differences. Like the only key one that really matters is that collaboration and kind of cloud-based nature of it, especially since all the files also get saved on a cloud server as well, versus to your desktop computer. It makes it just easier for file management, version control, those types of things there. Can you show up how to set a web object? Yes, I can.
Can you do that in 3 minutes, Josh?
Yes, sort of. Let's see. Challenge accepted, I guess, in this case. So if I was to come in here, let me find a kind of blankish page here, maybe to pull it into. Let's go with this 50/50. So I'll go ahead and just, delete this here. Essentially, to insert a web object, you come over here and hit web window, and you pick a source of what you're looking for. So whether that be a web address, local web-based content, page in your project, which for simplicity's sake is what I'll be doing. But you can do this again from a variety of different sources here. Google Doc, Wikipedia entry, a variety of different things. I did actually not know that we could do a Wikipedia entry directly, so that's kind of cool. Not necessarily always the best information, but it's there. But we'll do a page in project, and we'll just do, we'll put in slide 1, and we'll click OK here. And depending, I think, on what your object is, you will get a different. You may or may not get this preview here, because I have had other things where you don't. But in this case, since it's a page within my project, and you notice that as I resize that, it will put it in there. It is in this case putting these bars on top. I think that's just something with this page and project thing here. But if I had maybe put this on a white background, that won't look like that. Obviously, that'll look a little more seamless in there. But you can see where you can now come in here and edit this here and change what option you want to use here. Change out the slide again, as long as it's going to the same link that's named the same thing. So like if you put a web page in here, so say we put in I don't know if I can actually do this or not, but we'll see if I can. Let's go ahead and add this really quick. I think I don't remember if I can put an ELB learning or not, but we'll go ahead and throw in the ELB learning web page here. And we'll kind of take a preview here. Yeah, it is going to let me do it. Cool. Okay. You'll notice now that it's not pulling up as a preview here. So now as I go into page preview, which hopefully shows up here. Yep, it looks like it did. You now see that my web page is tied in here. So hit accept cookies, and it's essentially an iframe for this web page. In this case, it does look like it pulled up the mobile responsive version of our web page, which is interesting. And it's looking like I can't, for whatever reason, I think it might be just this web page. I can't scroll down, but you do have those options to throw those in. Again, that's a good way to, like was suggested from our development team, to let me get back to my original slide here, to put in content that you may want to trade out over time. So whether that be a logo or whatever that might be. So.
Awesome, thank you. I believe we have answered all of the questions right on time. So thank you, Josh, for joining us today and showing that to us. Thank you to everyone who joined us. If you do not already have Lectora, you can sign up for a free trial on our website, and that will allow you to try out these different workflows that Josh showed today and all the other features. And also, I'm going to quickly mention that we just a couple weeks ago transitioned the community to a new platform. And so if you were a previous member of the Rockstars community, you can import your account over and keep all of that in the new community. So I am going to paste a link to the new community in the chat. You can check that out. If you're not a member yet, you should join it because we have lots of Lectora users and other product users on there sharing tips and tricks. You can get a lot of answers to questions from other users and also our product and dev team on there. Otherwise, thank you everyone for joining us and have a great rest of your day.